giving up the possibility of influencing this planet that I can only have by being in physical embodiment. I am giving it up. I am selecting it out. Then you can ascend, but it is a choice, and it must be a fully conscious choice. There cannot be anything in your being you have not looked at, because then the prince of this world has something in you, and he will pull you back. Now, here's another thing. We have sometimes, and we recognize that whenever we give a teaching, it may cause some people to interpret it in a slightly imbalanced way. So, we have given many teachings on the ascension, and many Ascended Master students over the decades have gotten the idea that the only thing that really matters, the only thing you should really do as an Ascended Master student is strive for your ascension. You need to ascend as quickly as possible, certainly after this lifetime, if at all possible, or in the next lifetime. This is the case for some of you, but it is not the case for all of you. Because what are we on the verge of bringing in on this planet? Saint Germain's Golden Age. There are beings in embodiment, including avatars, who want to be part of manifesting Saint Germain's Golden Age. And this, of course, is not going to happen fully in the end of your lifetime, even if you are young at the present moment. So, there may be some of you where it is not in your divine plan that you ascend after this lifetime because you want to remain in or take succeeding embodiments in order to help manifest Saint Germain's Golden Age, or even experience Saint Germain's Golden Age. And so, this is what you can only discern when you come to the higher levels of your divine plan. And again, you can only really discern this when you resolve the birth trauma. Because, recognize this, my beloved, many avatars, because of the intensity and the pain involved with the birth trauma, have a desire to get out of here because they think they will get away from their birth trauma. And of course, when you ascend, you get away from your birth trauma. But you do not ascend until you have looked at and confronted your birth trauma. So there is this escape mechanism where people feel, oh, it's too much to deal with the birth trauma, so I'm just going to focus on making my ascension, and I'm sure I can do this without confronting my birth trauma. And it can't be done. So again, what will enable you to be a part of bringing forth Saint Germain's Golden Age, and what will enable you to experience it and really enjoy it? It is that you resolve your birth trauma. It doesn't mean that when you resolve your birth trauma, you will automatically ascend. You will have to ascend. Now you can choose to remain on earth and say, well, you know, now I've been struggling with this birth trauma for 2 million years. I sure would like to experience this planet without it. And there's absolutely nothing wrong with you making that choice, my beloved. Even if you have the option to ascend. Yes, of course, as was said in previous dispensations, it has a positive effect on the earth when someone ascends, it pulls up on the collective consciousness. But certainly, when someone has resolved their birth trauma and starts expressing their Christhood, and it also has a positive effect that you stay in embodiment. And again, this is not something that is forced upon you. There have been people who were Ascended Master students who almost felt forced to make their ascension or strive for their ascension because they had to do this to help the earth. But you have an absolute right to make that determination. I want to stay in embodiment and help bring Saint Germain's Golden Age. If, my beloved, all of you ascended tomorrow, who would bring the Golden Age? No, because you would be ascended. And when you are ascended, you cannot bring it into physical manifestation. My beloved, there have been previous ages in the earth. We have talked about root races and so forth. But there have been cycles where a civilization had gradually risen to a very high level, And there was a certain group of life streams who had been instrumental in bringing the civilization to that high level. And in doing so, the reason why they were instrumental in raising the civilization was that they had raised their own consciousness and started to manifest Christhood. And in doing so, of course, they had qualified for their ascension. And they had the free will choice, would they ascend or not. And there have been cases where so many of these mature life streams chose to ascend at the same time, that after they went out of embodiment, the civilization very quickly went into a downward spiral and collapsed, because there were not enough people in embodiment to, so to speak, hold the spiritual balance and to keep the civilization in an upward spiral. And in some cases, this meant that the fallen beings could move in, take up leadership, and bring the civilization down. And so you have to be careful and recognize there's always a balance to be found. Now again, we're not looking back and blaming these people for choosing to ascend. It was their right to make that choice. And it was the challenge of those who had seen these examples and were at lower levels. Would they step up and fill the vacuum? Or would they allow the fallen beings to come in and fill the vacuum? That was their choice and their challenge. It was perfectly all right how it outplayed itself. But what I'm simply saying to you is that as an Ascended Master student, you do not have to fixate your mind on thinking, I have to ascend after this lifetime. There's nothing you have to do. And you can certainly serve life, serve the earth, serve Saint Germain by remaining in embodiment when you have resolved that birth trauma and therefore are able to be much more an open door. Free will is absolute, and therefore in the realm of free will there can be no absolutes that you should or you should not. You see? It is important for you to come to this point because, my beloved, in order to fulfill the highest potential of your divine plan, you must overcome this sense that this is something forced upon you. You can even have a separate self that has heard about the concept of the divine plan, studied our teachings, but it still feels that this was forced upon you. Maybe even that you yourself forced your divine plan upon yourself. That is what this self feels. And you need to identify if you have that tendency, and then you need to look at it and say, I no longer need this self, I'm letting you die. Because you cannot fulfill the highest potential of your divine plan until you have full and absolute acceptance of it. In other words, you cannot feel that you made choices before you came into embodiment. But now that you are here and you see how difficult it is to be in physical embodiment and how things are on earth, you're not sure you can live up to those choices or fulfill those choices, or you're not even sure you're willing to fulfill those choices. And so you feel a certain conflict in you. It's almost like you are, like I said 2,000 years ago, a house divided against itself concerning your divine plan. And if there is a division in you between what is in your divine plan that you yourself chose to put in there, and then there is a separate self that has a different will, then you need to look at that. You cannot fulfill the highest potential of your divine plan as long as you are dragging this self around with you. And so again, you need to have this revolutionary shift of looking at this, saying, okay, I'm willing to take a look at this, I'm willing to go into it, I'm willing to experience what is the belief behind it. And then you see the unreality of the belief and you say, no, that isn't actually my choice. It might be the choice of this separate self. I see that it was because of whatever created the separate self, a trauma, a false belief, whatever. But I now see it and I choose to let it die, and I choose to then embrace what I actually put in my divine plan, because I am willing to rise to the level of consciousness from which I put those elements in my divine plan. And only when you let go of that separate self can you actually rise to that. Only then can you embrace your divine plan. Fully embrace it. And my beloved, when you look at my life as it was 2,000 years ago, if you're really honest, you will be able to see that I was in some way, I was the living Christ, but I was in some way the reluctant living Christ. You see this, for example, in the situation where before what led to my arrest and crucifixion, I was sitting in the Garden of Gethsemane. Some saying I was sweating drops of blood, some saying I wasn't sweating drops of blood, but that isn't really the point. The point is that I was saying, God, if it be thy will, let this pass from me. And then, nevertheless, not my will, but thine be done. But what does that show you? It shows you that even I, at the level of Christ that I had, there was still a division in my being, where I felt there was the will I had here, and there was a higher will. Was it God that was forcing this upon me? No. I had chosen this when I made my divine plan. I had chosen. But there was still a part of my outer being, my outer personality, a separate self, that hadn't fully embraced and accepted that. And so, what I'm saying is, this was, of course, perfectly in order. This was 2,000 years ago, much more dense consciousness. I was one of the forerunners for demonstrating the Christ consciousness. It was perfectly fine. But in today's age, you have the potential to step up higher, overcome this division in yourself, and fully embrace your divine plan. And that is, of course, what I desire to see from you, my beloved. Does that mean that you will manifest a higher level of Christhood that I manifested 2,000 years ago? Yes, it might mean that for you. Don't you think that's what I want for you? Do you think, my beloved, that as an ascended Master Jesus Christ, I have some ego ambition that I was the one who demonstrated Christhood on earth and I never want anyone to surpass me? I want you to do greater works than I did. I said it 2,000 years ago. It's not my problem that you haven't believed me. I am at peace with that. I leave that to your free will. I just point out to you that this is how I look at it. It will be my supreme joy to see many people, 10,000 people, manifest a higher level of Christhood than I could manifest 2,000 years ago. Even by, as I've said before, expressing that Christhood in a somewhat normal, in quotation marks of course, lifestyle. And so, my beloved, it has been my supreme joy to give you this discourse and to actually see the shifts in the consciousness of those of you who have absorbed it. And it will be my joy to see how it will spread like rings in the water and help more and more people come to that point of fully accepting the highest potential of your divine plan. Fully accepting your own choices.